Nicole Tibaldi, welcome to the work item. It's so good to have you here. It's such a nice day, and we have a fantastic guest today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to chat.
I'm excited to learn about your career because I have so many questions, and I put this document, and I'll start with the one that just kind of right off the bat, it's the most interesting one for me personally, is you're a senior engineering manager at the New York Times. What's it like being an engineering leader at a news organization? It's one of the biggest news organizations on the planet, and it's something that is I think you're the first person that we've ever had on this podcast that works for a news organization and not a typical tech company. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think there's two things that are really unique and stand out to me and that I love. One is that, yeah, I have had many, I don't know, I guess if you'd call them typical tech jobs. I've worked a lot in the dev tools space. And so I got very accustomed to that and had a ton of fun with that. But there is um, a different feel to working for the New York Times. And one is that, we're not building software for developers. We're building software for, in the case of my team, for the newsroom to use and across the company, for lots of people all over the world to use. And so there's a lot of opportunity to learn about the space within the company, whether that means like the news or even some of the other things that we do, like cooking and Wirecutter. So there's tons to learn outside of the scope of engineering, which I think is wonderful. And I think very many of us feel very passionate about what we do at the Times. So that's also exciting. It feels like there's something new to learn every day, which is something that I always love. And the other related thing, which I think is great, this is by far the largest organization I've worked at, and it's full of wonderful people. And both as a manager and just as an employee of the company, there is such a large peer group that I have of people who I can talk to, who I can learn from, who I can hear about their experiences. And so it feels like I have a ton of resources, which is super exciting, and I love it.
Is it easier or harder than working on developer tools? I'm curious.
I would say it's different. One of the challenges that I thought about working on developer tools is, as a developer, right, you very closely understand what you, I was going to say what developers want, but I think it's more like what you think developers want. And so one of the challenges there is getting out of your own head and remembering that your users are not necessarily you. And so, that is different. Um, on the flip side, sometimes it was a little bit easier to, like, particularly on my team where we're building tools specifically for the newsroom to use, and the newsroom kind of being its own world. I occasionally struggle to wrap my own mind around that, whereas like developer use cases were a little bit more familiar to me.
So, how do you go about identifying the right use cases or the right structure for the software that you're building for the newsroom? Because again, it seems like one of those areas where when you're building something for an external audience, right? These are the people that will buy your product, they will download your product, they'll just subscribe, they'll use it, they're going to be providing you the feedback. Here, you're working with something that is a tool for a bigger organization. So, what's that contrast like?
Yeah, it's real, and we've put some things in place to make it a little bit easier for us. We actually have some folks in a special role on the team who are either from the newsroom or used to work in the newsroom, who are either full time, half time, dedicated to our team, dedicated to helping us understand these things, so that we don't have to necessarily always go out and like constantly do formal user research. We also do that. That is one of the ways in which we learn about it. So it's also really nice to just have these folks embedded on our team, learning about what their life is or was like in the newsroom. Occasionally, they'll give us like slide presentations about the life cycle of a news story, and it's all fascinating, and it helps us kind of understand what our users might be looking for.
How does user research work in the case of an internal product?
I think much in the way that you might expect, talking to people, getting their feedback, taking notes, digging in. So, um, an interesting thing about working for the Times is that, in many ways we are one company, and in many ways we are also separate. Like the journalistic work that happens at the Times is very different from what's happening within the tech org. So I think in some ways it kind of does feel like going out and talking to, to people kind of like a little bit outside of our team.
I want to ask, how did you find that role? Because generally, when you talk to folks that are breaking into the engineering field, a lot of them will talk about working at the FANG companies, right? They want to work at the next Facebook, Amazon, the Microsoft, the Netflix. But you went and decided to work for a news organization. What led you to this decision?
I think my answer is probably a little bit unsatisfying. I was reached out to by recruiting some months ago, and I guess my thought process around it maybe is helpful, which is that I loved working in the dev tool space. I loved working with other developers. I've also done some other things over the course of time, consulting work. I worked for a hotel booking company for a while, but I've always had a passion for journalism. I've never been a journalist. I don't think that's ever been something that like played to my strengths, but when I was in high school, I did write for the school newspaper and was like a huge nerd about it. When I was in college, I was on the school radio station, and just like the vibe of those things always really appealed to me. And I had, yeah, probably never thought about working for the New York Times, but then when I heard from recruiting, I was like, oh my gosh, I think this is a great role for me. It's a great fit for like my interests and then also my strengths within my career.
Did you happen to have any reservations about joining an organization that, well, I don't want to say it's primarily technical because there's still a lot of technical work that needs to be done, but that its core product or its core value is not the technical side of things, because folks read the New York Times for the content and not necessarily for the CMS that sits behind it or any of the tools. How was that thought process for you?
I mean, it's definitely, yeah, not like the classic tech role, but when you stop and take a moment to think about it, and the categories of problems that we're solving, I don't think are any less difficult than the kinds that you'd see at a FANG company. We are serving a very large user base. There are a lot of complexities to being able to publish, all sorts of different, that's the other thing is like, the New York Times is so much more than just a newspaper now, just a newspaper. It's we have audio, we have podcasts, we have video, and so there's a ton of really interesting categories of problems. One of the things that I had seen a lot from the New York Times that always kind of played to my interests, and I thought was a really like hard and interesting space in engineering was data visualization. And I know that the Times had been at the forefront of that a lot. So when I kind of took a moment to think about it, it was more of a like, wow, I wonder what all of the things they're working on are, because there are probably even more than I can think of. And that turned out to be true.
Well, and the sheer scale, and by the way, the visualization at New York Times, every single time I come across one of those graphs, it's beautiful, it's fantastic. So the team is doing a great job. We talked a little bit about your work there, and I know that our listeners are very much interested in your origin story. So this is something that is key to, I guess, your career where you are now. Is where did it all start? You mentioned that you took a stint at the newsletter back in the day, but what led to your current engineering path?
Yeah. Would you like me to go all the way back to the beginning or just the beginning of my tech career?
Whichever way you want to start with this, because I feel like any role that you take or folks take is helping you develop towards where you end up ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, my career path has been long and winding. I would say I've had probably three different careers at this point. And I've written and talked about it a little bit. But for those who are listening and just learning about it, I went to college for classical music performance and was very passionate about it. And kind of one of the things that I later realized made me love tech too is that, music kind of exists at the intersection of logic and creativity. Like there's lots of structure, but there's also lots of space to create. And that's what I later kind of discovered that I really enjoyed about building software also. But at the time, I was really focused on having a career in performance, getting out and doing all those kinds of things. And I think for a number of reasons, I decided to move away from it. It's very, very competitive, and it's very difficult to make a career out of that. And upon graduating from college and realizing that that may not have been the most realistic path for me for a number of personal reasons, I took a job in banking out of necessity. And I did that for a while, and I found myself to be pretty good at it. There were a lot of components to my job that had to do with like being organized and being detail oriented. And I kind of worked my way into a management and mentorship leadership role there. But what did challenge me the most, I think, was that the day to day of what I was doing was very much static. My days were kind of bleeding together. It was all the same. And so at the time, I was in a relationship with somebody who was a data engineer, and I started to talk to him about like how he had gotten into the field because that was not his college degree either. And he was largely self-taught over a number of years, like working his way through things. And I think you'll hear a lot of stories of that for people, right? Like I had this really boring job and I tried to figure out how I could automate something. And like that was my first foray into software engineering. Working at a bank with all the security restrictions that you have, that wasn't really something that was possible for me, right? It wasn't like, oh, I have to deal with this repetitive process every day. And so I'm going to like write some software and use it on a computer within the bank. So I had been browsing Facebook one day, saw an ad for App Academy, which was the boot camp that I ultimately attended, started to ask some questions, was definitely super skeptical about it. Like it didn't seem realistic to me to be able to study something for 12 weeks and then, go out and find a job. But over time, I started to like teach myself a little bit in my spare time, felt really interested in what I was learning, felt like I needed a little bit more structure if I was going to get anywhere with it. I didn't feel like I was going to be one of those people who had this story of like, I worked on this by myself for years and years and then eventually, started a new career. Got through the interview process for App Academy, which was very difficult. And then did the program, which we can or can't talk about more if you'd like. And then, started to interview and look for jobs and made my way and did honestly what kind of felt like it was impossible. I was very lucky to have a really good first experience in tech. So that was also very helpful. I think like coming out of a program, there's still a ton that you have to learn and you need a lot of support. And I was very grateful to have that opportunity.
So it's interesting because you were describing this experience of going from a career that is not inherently super technical to just switching tracks. Right? And you started from music, went to banking, and then tech. Now, there's a lot of opinions around today with boot camps because boot camps are opening this opportunity to learn new skills very quickly in this accelerated manner. But some folks believe that it's okay to also learn on your own. And you mentioned structure. Was that the primary value why you decided to go for a more formal learning course instead of just trying to learn and experiment by yourself?
Yeah, and I think there are advantages and disadvantages to both. And I think it also has a lot to do with personality. I think there's also a lot of debate about like boot camps versus traditional computer science degrees. I think there are advantages and disadvantages to both of those. But for me, I was not in a personal position to like go back to a multi-year degree program. And I did feel like I needed structure. I was worried that if I taught myself, I would not learn best practices and that I would teach myself the wrong things, focus in the wrong areas. So I felt like if I had this goal and I wanted to achieve it and I needed to quit my job in order to do it, I wanted somebody to kind of like guide me to the right path.
The interesting part here too is that boot camps, at least from what I understand, I've never personally attended a boot camp, but it's much more practical and hands-on about a specific area or topic versus a degree has this kind of a formal structure of all the things that you could possibly do. And I'm looking at it this way. I look back at my own experience and the degree that I have. And if I think of the things that I apply day to day in my job, there's not really a lot. So I remember I loved some ethics classes. I loved some philosophy classes. There's some math. But ultimately, a lot of the super complicated algos and all that stuff, it's great to know, but it's not necessarily day-to-day applicable. Versus when you go to a boot camp, they show you here's how to build a website and here's how to run it. And here's all the things you need to consider, the things that I have personally never learned in college. It's just not it does not quite align with the coursework.
It's two different sides of the coin, and I'm not sure that anybody's found like the perfect way to marry them yet. I've worked with a lot of engineers and mentored engineers who have come out of both types of places, and including being self-taught too. And I think that sometimes computer science graduates have like a really good handle on some larger conceptual things, but like I've also coming right out of school maybe aren't like so comfortable writing code that compiles, like being able to be ready to like do work in production. And I think, some of those things are true of bootcamp graduates, and it's really advantageous to have that experience. But then sometimes you'll run into some larger conceptual things and be like, oh gosh, like I got to catch up on this. So, I think in both cases, you're going to end up filling in some gaps. It's just like which ones or which kind of program appeals to you.
Well, and ties into the conversation that I heard earlier on this podcast, where not everyone needs to be a low-level engineer, right? If I go to college and I learn C, for a lot of folks, that can be very scary because they're like, oh my gosh, C, I don't understand it. It's just so complex. And that's okay, because maybe you're good at writing JavaScript. Maybe that just clicks. But that formal course that kind of threw you into C and said, okay, now learn how to swim, and you have to assemble your own, the rescue vest. Well, good luck with that. That doesn't quite work really well. So I think it's good that there's options now. And from what you're describing, essentially, it shows that it is entirely possible to go from bootcamp to a successful career. You don't need to necessarily have a formal degree in computer science.
And, I think that it's really an advantage to those of us working in the industry to have people with different backgrounds, because the truth of the matter is like you need the skills that you need to have in order to get your foot in the door, so to speak. But once that's true, people with different strengths working together on a team are what makes a really great team. It's funny that you mentioned your coursework and like the things that you learned in different classes that you had. I feel like I learned so much from my degree in music that's applicable to my career in tech. And like if you had told me that years ago, I would have thought, there's no way that could be true, but it really is.
Let's talk more about that, because you actually are jumping right to the question that I was going to ask, because you kind of called out the intersection of logic and creativity. And now that you mentioned that you learned a lot from your music degree, tell us more. What were those lessons learned?
Yeah, I think the logic and creativity bit has a lot to do with like my interest in both topics. The things that I learned from doing a degree in classical music were the kinds of skills that I think they'd apply in a lot of places, but I'll talk about a few. So one was ability to learn. Like there are so many different styles of music, so much that you need to know in terms of like practical application versus theory, which sounds very familiar to something we were just talking about. And then there were some other things that I don't know if it had to do with, I think it was both my experience in school and then also trying to like audition and win jobs, but having a lot of patience, learning how to practice things without getting frustrated, or learning how to cope with that frustration, learning how to work on a team, like playing in groups is such a big way to learn how to work with other people. And then maybe the most important one was how to handle rejection. When you're taking auditions, you expect that most of the ones that you do, you will not get a favorable result. And in job hunting, especially, when I first started out in the industry, you get way more rejection than you do acceptance, right? And then you bring that directly into the workplace too. You're not going to get every implementation right the first time. You're not going to be able to convince everybody of your opinion every time. And so being able to gracefully handle all of those things is a really valuable skill.
Based on what you're outlining, everyone needs to get a music degree instead of a computer science degree, because all these skills, I wish I worked with more people that excel at these kind of things, like conflict resolution, expecting failure, because there's this tendency for perfection and knowing everything. And the reality is much more nuanced than that. For you're describing, where sometimes it's okay that your product doesn't quite align and you have to scrap it and say, you know what, doesn't work. That's fine. We learn a lot, but it does not work. But something that you called out is also coping with frustration. And I'm interested to learn more about how do you cope with frustration? Because especially in software engineering, this is one of those areas where there's all these jokes about, folks tossing the monitor out the window when things just don't go right because it's so complicated and you just can't figure out how this bug got in there and how to solve it. What's your strategy to that?
Yeah, I think it's different depending on the thing. One is that, just like with practicing an instrument, you don't expect to get it right on the first pass, and I think being able to internalize that is one thing that really helps. So for me, being able to work through problems sort of stepwise and be okay with, like, okay, well, that was 30% of what I expected my to work, and then being able to kind of go from there. The other thing that I would say was really critical is being able to walk away. And I don't mean just like walk away and do nothing, but there are so many other parts to what we do in our jobs other than, just sitting down and writing code. That, if I've reached a point where I feel like I'm really banging my head against the wall and there's nobody else available to work with me, or that's not like the thing that I need to do right now, there are so many other things that, I could step away and review PR, or like engage with some conversation that's happening about the direction of the product, and then be able to come back to it either later that day or the next day with fresh eyes. I can't tell you how many times I've woken up in the middle of the night with a solution to a problem, like, oh, I know why that feature flag wasn't working. And just being okay with, like, not just brute forcing through every problem, and knowing that, like, you will eventually get there, that sometimes, like, sitting in that frustration actually doesn't really help.
So again, it's counter the common narrative around the fact that to solve a problem, you just have to chug a bunch of Red Bull, spend a couple of nights doing it, and then you'll figure it out. So essentially, walking away can be a solution to actually find the right approach.
And you know what? We engage with so many different parts of our brains when we're working in this field. I think, like, just hammering on one all the time can be really hard too, right? Like, chugging a bunch of Red Bull is not going to help me write a better solution. So I think that's it too. It's like, okay, if I have kind of like reached the end of what I think I can do logically today, like, maybe I go engage with the creative side for a little bit, and make myself useful that way for a while.
And I think part of the problem there too is the modern hustle culture, where there's just so much of just do, instead of just saying, take a pause, think about the problem, take a break, go take a vacation. You don't need to work on this 24/7 every single day of the year. I do have a question related to the skills, responsibilities, and all the different things that you do in your career. Because from what I learned about you, your career is very, I want to say, non-linear, because it went, again, through different stages that are, each is very unique in its own way. So you develop a range of skills. You kind of thought about the different skills that help you kind of progress. What do you think about the concept of career maps, right? Because a lot of folks, what they do is they think kind of 5 years ahead and say, in 5 years, I want to become an engineer at this company, at this level. Do those work or do those don't? Because it seems like in your case, it went from a music degree to being a senior engineering manager at New York Times. This is not something that you could probably pen out on paper 10 years ago and say, this is exactly where I'll end up.
Yeah, in the case of career pivots, I'm not sure that that's a practical application. But I will say, if I think starting at, like, the inception of my tech career, there is some credence to doing that. I don't think it's a bad idea. I will say that I'm guilty of not really having thought it through at the beginning. I was so laser focused on the goal of just developing the skills that I needed to get into the industry that I never really thought about, what do I want to do long term? Do I want to become a principal engineer? Do I want to be an engineering manager? Do I want to be a developer advocate? Do I want to eventually pivot into product? There are so many options. Truthfully, I had never even really thought about any of those things, or like what the inner workings of a tech org were. And that kind of, I wouldn't say it put me at a disadvantage, but it definitely left me like in a place eventually where I had started doing some different things, and I had to stop and think about like, what is my long-term goal? And those long-term goals can change. At the time I was kind of debating whether or not I like, as I got farther along in my career, had done a bunch of different things. I was debating whether or not I wanted to move into more of like a developer advocate role, because I do love working with people and I love speaking, and all of those things really make me happy, or if I wanted to work in management and kind of foster a lot of cross-functional relationships, and also like utilize a lot of the people skills and that side of things. I probably would have benefited from like sitting down and taking a think on that earlier than I did. Not that it didn't work out well, but it definitely can be useful. And the thing is, there's a good chance that even if you don't end up in the role you were imagining, that the skills that you're trying to build when you do something like that are still relevant to a thing that you will eventually do, right? Because everybody does have their own strengths and their own interests, and you are likely to kind of move in the direction of those. So taking a pause to think about like, how can I work toward this goal, is never a bad idea.
I'm also a fan of the approach when you're early enough in your career of just trying things out and seeing what your strengths are. Because at that point, you might not even know, are you a good developer advocate? Are you a product person? Are you an engineering manager? So it would be too early to kind of almost try to force yourself to say, I'm going to do this and this only, instead of just trying it out, seeking out opportunities and see like, maybe I'll try to be a developer advocate for some time. And if it doesn't work out, the beauty of our industry is that we don't have to do, residency for 4 years to be a product lead. And then you're like, all right, for life, I'm now a product lead on a SaaS product. This is it, right? Like doctors do. Like we don't have that constraint. So fortunately, we can switch. But from what I learned in some of your previous talks, also your transition from individual contributor to engineering manager was fairly organic. And tell me more about, how did you become an engineering manager? Like, was that a goal that you explicitly set out, or was it more of a thing that you figured out based on your strengths?
A little bit of both. So at the time that I had really started to think about this, I was working at a startup and kind of naturally, out of necessity, was doing a whole bunch of different stuff. We had a lot of roles within the organization that involved doing different things. And so after I got really comfortable just like working there and contributing to the code, I started to run all of our agile ceremonies, and I was like, oh, I really like this, and I think I have some good ideas about how I can improve it, and I had a lot of fun with that. And then I pivoted to a little bit of a different role where I was working a lot with product and design, and really enjoyed being able to kind of like provide my technical perspective there and build those relationships, and make sure that the team was benefiting from like a good relationship with all the functions. And I enjoyed that a lot too. And then I was kind of like mentoring and working with some other people on the team. And that was like a bit of, a foray into that type of leadership. Um, and I had thought a lot about doing management because I've always loved working with people. I worked in management in my banking life, and had some experience doing it there. And then one day, I a friend sent me a job posting for a sort of like first time engineering manager role, and I was reading the job description and looking through all of it, and I was like, oh, I already do all of this stuff, and I love it, and this kind of like perfectly describes the kind of things that I want to be doing, and that's how I ended up there. So I had given it some thought, in the sense that like I really like leadership, I really like doing all of these things. I would like to maybe be a manager someday, and then started to realize like, you know what, I've grown some of these skills already, and I think maybe it's okay for me to feel comfortable moving into one of those roles.
What were some of the biggest challenges once people started actually reporting to you? Because I feel like once you're an individual contributor, yes, you can influence other people to do certain things. We all hear about the influence without authority. And if you're you know your stuff, people will listen to you, and then you can contribute. When you're a manager, that power dynamic shifts. What are the challenges for you?
I think the biggest challenge for me, having done that one role where I started to explore a lot of these things, I had been on the team for a while. I had built a lot of relationships with people, and put a lot of energy into that. And so we naturally had a peer relationship, and also like I did not have a formal title. Like people were not reporting to me. The thing that I didn't really think of that surprised me the most and challenged me the most was there's a little bit of loneliness that comes with being in a management role. There's naturally and like a power imbalance, and it's healthy for you not to have a relationship with people who report to you that's the same as if you were peers. It's actually bad if that's true, right? If you have like a peer type relationship with somebody who reports to you, but it did sort of take me by surprise. I wasn't entirely ready for it. And so being able to be okay with that, to find, different ways to not feel that loneliness, and then also to make sure that I was able to still have like trusting relationships with my direct reports, and for them to know that like yes, they do report to me, like that is a managerial relationship, there's like some natural implications there, but that I'm there to support them and help them grow.
How are those relationships different between, you said, the peers and then the reports? What are the kind of key takeaways?
I think naturally things that come up in conversation between peers won't necessarily come up between a direct report and their manager, or at least not necessarily right away. Like I remember, talking with my peers about like challenges that we felt were happening in the organization. Those kinds of things. It definitely takes a lot of trust for somebody to raise that to their manager, and in some cases, like they just won't, right? And that's totally normal and okay. But then being able to, as a manager, still get to the heart of what people need is important.
How do you foster that trust for candid conversations? Because that seems like another tricky topic for a manager to break into. How do you know that people will trust you to tell you the deficiencies in the org, or maybe some issues that they're experiencing, in a way that is not necessarily everyone just comes to you complaining about things, or people don't come to you at all because they're worried about sharing these kind of more intricate details of the org?
It's different for everyone, and that's one of the things. One of the challenges and one of the things that's exciting about people management is kind of like everybody's comfort level is different with different things. Some people operate very much from a place of trust right away, and some people take some time to build that trust, and that always has to do with their personal history and their personalities. I can't control any of those things. What I can control is my own behavior, and that's what I try to do all the time. I try to show people that I follow through on things when they ask me to do things, and I try to be very upfront about what I can and can't do. So if somebody comes to me with a concern, I'll make it clear what some actions I think I can take are, and then I always follow through on those. And try to come back to them and let them know what the status is all the time, because sometimes those types of things don't get resolved right away either. I also try to be very candid when I don't have the answer, or I think something's a little bit of a gnarly situation and I don't know what to do. But I will then say, like I've noted this, I will come back and talk to you about it when I have some more information. And then, if you do those things effectively, if you are honest and if you follow through, the trust naturally builds over time.
And you mentioned that being a manager can be lonely. Do you proactively seek out any kind of coaching or mentorship that helps you be a good manager?
I don't think I could point to any one thing. I think it's all really useful, but I'll go through a few. I've worked at 2 companies now that have had relationships with organizations that do coaching, and there is a lot of I would recommend, like if anybody wants to know the differences between coaching, mentoring, and sponsorship, check out all of Lara Hogan's materials. But coaching often has to do with sort of allowing the person, asking probing questions and allowing the person to arrive at the answer themselves. And so a lot of these coaching services weren't even necessarily like, I wasn't talking to folks who had like deep experience in engineering, but did have like really great experience kind of helping you pull the answers out of your own mind. It's hard. It's frustrating to go through that, but it's so useful. So I would always make sure to like block time around those because they can feel really draining. I also do have a mentor that I talk to every 2 weeks, like somebody who works in the industry, somebody who's outside of my company. And I think it's really great to be able to have, candid conversations about like my career and what I think, my strengths and weaknesses are. It's hard to be that vulnerable at work. And so that's a little bit more of a safe environment for that. And then now one of the things that I am most excited about being at the New York Times is another resource that I have is my peers. And I have tons and tons of people that I can talk to about different topics that I'm passionate about. I've definitely tried to go out and foster those skills as much as I can. There's also like tons of workshops and things available for people who are interested in leadership and learning how to coach people, how to mentor people, how to manage people. So I've done a lot of those things.
And that part is so important because when I talk to folks that are new to the industry, oftentimes they get into these modes of trying to solve the problem by themselves without having the experience, and they're afraid to ask for help. They're inherently saying, well, I got hired to figure this out. And did you ever experience this kind of, I want to say like tension to ask for help? Because when somebody starts as a manager, you're kind of given that trust of saying, you know what you're doing. That's why you're a manager, versus being vulnerable and saying, yeah, I know some things, but there's still a lot of things that I need help with. Where do I go for help? Like how did you resolve that tension for you?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to be vulnerable in that situation at all. But I think it gets easier as this maybe is a little unsatisfying too. Like as I've built trust with my managers, being able to go to them amongst other people and talk to them about tough situations that come up, right? Because I think a lot of things in this industry you really benefit from being able to kind of like pattern match, like, oh, I've seen this before and I know how to handle it. And when you encounter something you haven't seen before, it can often be really jarring. And I think a thing that I try to keep in mind when I'm afraid to be a little bit vulnerable about a new situation is that there's a tremendous responsibility to being a manager, to being a leader. You have a responsibility to the people who report to you and also to the company. And so if I don't go out and do that hard work on myself to make sure that I learn how to handle different situations and navigate things, I'm doing a disservice to the people who work with me. I take that really seriously.
I love the concept of pattern matching because, again, this answers the question of when folks ask, well, how do you know all these things? Like, yeah, because I've been doing it for like 7 years and I've seen the exact situation. It's okay if you don't know because this is the first time you're encountering this. And when you have nothing to pattern match, it's okay to ask for that help. But one of the things that I'm also curious about in the manager track is, and especially in the engineering management, I often hear that once you become an engineering manager, you get so deep into these people problems and figuring out your organizational structure, and there's political sides of it, that you just don't have time to code and do things that you've been doing as an individual contributor. How did you find that balance personally between figuring out these people problems and also not losing touch with kind of the technical side of things?
I think pattern matching is the answer there too. So when you think about a lot of people talk about engineering management in the like three-legged stool way. So you have people, process, and technology. And I will say like the people and process bits definitely take up a lot of time. And so does the technology piece. But I think the thing that is challenging about it, or that like not everybody frames in a way that is useful, is you either get like really focused on the people part of the job or really focused on the technology part of the job, and then you end up neglecting the people part. I view my piece in the technology part of the job is not necessarily to like know everything about the code base in which my team is working, but to have recognized those patterns that I ran into in my career and being able to have those conversations with people, and encourage them to look at other solutions or think about a problem differently. But I'm never going to be the one with all the answers. So I think it's more of just being able to like pull from experiences that I've had and talk about those with people and then lean on them as the experts.
Well, and going back to the topic of mentorship, something that I'm curious too, because you're working with a lot of people, how do you mentor your team? Because it seems like it's one of those also hard problems that you have people reporting to you. It's in your best interest for them to be successful, because if they're successful, your product's successful, your team is successful. How do you approach the problem, or I don't want to say the problem, the opportunity of making sure that you provide that mentorship component to your direct reports?
I would say it's similar in the sense that like my piece in mentorship is not necessarily being the person who has all the information that they need, although sometimes I am. But being the person who can help them identify what their next steps need to be. And that's either, like by observing or by talking to them, right? There are different components to this. Like one is being able to perform well in your role within the company. And then the other is like being able to grow toward whatever it is that you want to do, right? We were talking a little bit about career paths earlier. If you have some sense of what you want to be doing, then you also need to have some sense of like what things you need to work on to get there. So I think a really core part of my job is being able to help people work through thinking about, like, what is it that I need to learn? And then if I'm not the person who is able to teach them that, which like very often I won't be, right? Then I can help them find the resources that they need. So that's kind of how I like to think about that, is more of it can be very daunting to think about like what areas you need to grow in, and being able to break down that problem is something that I've enjoyed doing and tried to get better at over the course of my career.
And in terms of team culture, again, as a manager, now that I think about all the things that you probably would need to have, one of the questions that I have is disagreement, where on any team, you want to have people that can say, you know what, this is actually a bad solution. Here's why. It seems like if you're a manager, there will be that tension of, well, I can't say no to my manager. I can't say no to the team lead. How do you foster that culture of disagreement and coming up with the right idea where it doesn't matter if you disagree with your manager, because yes, the power dynamic, like we talked about earlier, is shifted. But at the same time, you need to have that healthy balance of saying no, or maybe we should consider doing it this way when you might not have the full picture. What's that like?
Yeah, I want people to disagree with me, and that's something that it can be difficult for people to feel comfortable doing that, right? One of the things that I think is really important is showing people that I'm not like really super attached to my ideas. I had somebody once describe to me in a different context, like the idea of working on something as like having a tool bag full of tools that you can pull out and try to use. And so often in situations where we're having like a team process problem or, something else, I have a tool that I have like learned how to use over the course of my career, and I pull that out because that's what I'm familiar with, and we try it. And if it doesn't work, then we like toss it aside and we pick something else that either I know or that somebody else knows. So I try to always ask people for feedback directly, which sometimes it takes a while for people to feel comfortable, but I know that if I'm always asking, they know that it's important to me. And then the other is just like being able to say, you know what, this isn't working. It may have been an idea that I had. That's fine. Like we can move on, and try something else. And then finally, the other thing I'll say is like, yeah, there are scenarios where I do have to make a call. Somewhere in Radical Candor, there is a discussion about how it's very important to make it clear to people when a decision is being made by consensus versus when you're looking for input. And so I always just try to be really clear about that too, because I think a lot of these things, the struggle can be expectation setting rather than like what the ultimate conclusion is. So in those cases where I, because of something being, company policy or like things that I can't change, I try to be really clear about why that is and what kind of input I'm looking for from people.
And that is such a perpetual problem of people getting too attached to their ideas, because even I struggle with that sometimes when you try to convince folks and you kind of start getting that sense of, oh, they're really attached to this project because they've been working on this for so long that they just refuse to change or take any input because they feel like this is mine. You're trying to invade on something that I've been building and you don't know anything about it. What's your recipe in your experience as an engineering manager to help prevent people getting too attached to the little things?
When people get really attached to things, I generally tend to think it's because, or at least my experience has been, they've been working on them a long time. I've put a ton of effort into this. Like I put hours and hours into this implementation. I think the solution to that is often being super iterative. That's something that I believe in as a principle throughout all of the different flavors of things that we do as engineers is, if you go away and you work on something for a week or a month or a year, you're naturally going to feel very, very attached to it. Whereas if you work on something, bring it back to the team later that day, get some feedback, it's a lot easier to absorb that. So I think that that to me is the most critical part, is being able to break problems down, be able to get the team talking about things together, and then that becomes a little bit more natural. And it's okay to say, like, it's a lot easier to say I'm going to throw away a day's work or an hour's worth of work than it is, a week's work or a month's worth of work.
And on the topic of culture as well, in your blog, you mentioned that you are big on building an inclusive culture within your team, including a culture for remote workers. How has it been for you being a manager with a team of distributed folks? Because that seems like the challenge for this year and probably for years to come, in terms of a lot of folks are going to be shifting to remote workplaces. They want to work from home even past pandemic, because that offers a gamut of opportunities that did not exist before. As a manager, what were some of the challenges or roadblocks that you've encountered with remote teams?
So it depends on what kind of distributed team you're working in. I've done a few different types of things. I worked for a team that was hybrid, like half of the folks were in the office and half of everybody else was sort of distributed throughout North America. I've worked in companies that had offices, but like only a few people worked there, and then people worked like all over the place elsewhere. When I worked at Gatsby, we were very international, so there were people all over the place. We did have an office, but it was a physical space in which like 2 or 3 people worked there. And now we're in the pandemic world, right, which is something completely different. So I think one is just kind of like acknowledging what the situation you're in calls for is definitely part of it. The other is when we work in offices together, we get very attached to synchronous communication. And I do think synchronous communication is very important, but not every single thing needs to be that way. And so being okay with letting go of every single thing being a meeting is something that I think is really important, and having those synchronous conversations be the most critical ones, and then giving people the freedom and the flexibility, because I think that is probably the most important part of remote work, to not have to be in front of their camera every moment, and to trust that people are doing their work in the way that makes the most sense for them.
It's that cultural shift where before, yeah, like during the shift to remote, what I've seen happen is a lot of folks started shifting to having all the meetings that they previously had in person to having those meetings virtually. And that was the number one thing. It's like, whoa, hold on. You don't actually need that. You don't need to have those meetings. There's a document that you can comment on. And that shift took a while for people to click with. Have you noticed the same thing in the teams that you work with?
It kind of depends on where you're coming in and like where the team is at with it, right? Some teams have been doing it longer and feel more comfortable with that, and some teams not as much. So it's there's definitely like some people who feel more comfortable with having all that synchronous communication and I think structure, and then some people who are actually kind of favor not having it. And that also speaks to just everybody's different, right? Some people do really well in those synchronous conversations, and I've actually found that like some of the engineers I've worked with do a lot better in expressing their opinions when they have some time to synthesize what is going on and then being able to react. So I think there's also a tremendous advantage to taking advantage of both kinds of communication, because then you play to different people's strengths.
I know I'm one of those people too, where if you put me in a meeting and say, all right, make a decision right now, but can I think about it? Can I take a day or a couple of hours to just kind of think the pros and cons? It's not as easy. So it definitely makes sense. The other side of remote work is the little bit lack of human connection. And every meeting, every call that we get, it's all about work, 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 work. Here's a document to review. Here's an email coming in. You look at Slack. There's something in Slack. How do you foster that human connection so folks still understand that they're working with individuals? You're not just cogs in a machine, but you are people with people interests and hobbies and everything else.
The first thing I'll say, which I believe is the most important one, is the one that's impossible right now, which is I do personally believe that human connection does in some cases need to be fostered in person. That doesn't mean we need to all sit in the same office and work together all the time. But the remote organizations where I felt like I've had the strongest relationships are ones where we would take a quarterly trip and we would all be together. And the value that comes out of that is not necessarily the meetings you're having, although those can be really valuable too, but the coffee that you had with somebody, the conversation that you had in the hallway, and then being able to take that foundation and bring it back to, when you're working from home. So there's nothing any of us can really do about that right now, but it is important as a lot of companies shift into a longer term distributed culture to know that those in-person meetings can be so valuable in ways that I can't even explain. And then, I think in absence of that, being okay with making space for conversations during the workday that don't necessarily revolve around work. I am super happy when people, take to Slack and start talking about, a craft that they worked on over the weekend or something that they baked. Like that's how we form connections, is through mutual interests. And I try to, facilitate that as much as I can by having, open calls where people can come, sign on and just talk. Those can be a little difficult sometimes. Like they don't have the same organic qualities that in-person things do sometimes. We've also done things on my current team and on previous teams where, if just sitting together and talking about what we did over the weekend is maybe a little awkward, we'll actually just work on something together. Very recently, my team took a few hours on Monday to work on a project all together that they had kind of decided was like a little bit of a tough one, and they thought they could benefit from the collective minds of everybody. They really cranked it out super fast, which was great. But to me, the most important part was that they got to spend some time together working on that. And they all seemed to have a lot of fun with it.
That's a hard problem to crack, because even those pointless conversations in Slack or Teams or whichever tool you're using are hard to, I want to say, get started from zero, because people feel that awkwardness of like, am I just going to post a photo of my pie that I made over the weekend and nobody's going to react and everyone's just going to ignore it? That feels odd. But then if you don't have somebody that starts doing that, well, where does it go from there? And I know from experience, especially for teams that have had that serendipitous set of conversations, that you have the water cooler talk, you go to the coffee machine, you discuss things. But now, where it's technically, there's a public square in your whatever communication tool you're using, but people don't feel the same, I want to say, like the freedom to express themselves or to like crack a joke or anything like that. It's a little bit of a challenge.
I think it's also the same as the being okay with failure in terms of, an engineering standpoint. Is I try things all the time and not all of them land, and it's okay. I've done in the past, like as part of stand up, we would do a silly prompt for everybody to answer in addition to what they were working on. Like, what's your favorite type of salsa or something like that. And sometimes they lead to really hilarious conversations. My team, one of my previous teams used to joke that I brought up this story a lot. But in one stand-up, we did a question about like, what was the most egregious fashion trend you ever participated in? And for some reason, that one just took hold on the team. And after we all hung up from the call, everybody started like sharing old pictures of themselves. And it was really funny, and it was a great point for us to connect. But I think it would have been fine with me too if that one flopped. And so just being okay with like embracing that awkwardness and knowing that not every single thing is going to be something that everybody engages with, but still trying.
It depends on the level of awkwardness, because I've heard stories of folks trying to do like a dance party on Zoom during stand up, and I'm like, I'm not participating in that. No, I am not doing that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Count me as not a team player, but it's too awkward.
And that's important too, is, I try to gauge people's comfort levels with things before trying anything that's super out of the ordinary, right? So there's like safer territory, like what's your favorite salsa is not really a controversial question, right? But for some of the things where like I don't think people would feel comfortable with them, I'll either ask or I'll make it optional. And it is hard to convey a sense that something is truly optional, but I try to be very clear that like this is not tied to your job performance, right? It's just a way for you to connect with people if you feel up to it.
Right. So with everything that's going on, do you see remote work taking a stronger foothold in our industry, like just in tech in general? Or do you expect the pendulum to swing the other way where now folks are so starved for that in-person communication that they just cannot go back to the office?
I think everybody's different, but I do think that remote work is going to take hold now. You know, in our industry, there really is no necessity to be sitting in the same physical space all the time. And in so many ways, for people with different life circumstances, remote work allows them to be able to manage those better, whatever that might be. And so I think for people, a lot of people see it as like a benefit or a quality of life improvement. You know, I feel a little bit that my perspective on this was like I didn't have remote work forced upon me because of the pandemic. I had been doing it for a number of years prior to that happening, and I pursued it because I had a really, really, really long commute, and it was frankly ruining my life. And I was also, I missed being able to be at home with my dog, and I missed being able to go to the gym. Like I woke up at 6 a.m. every day, got dressed, got on the train, and didn't get home until 8 p.m. And it stripped so many of the important things away from my life, and then being able to like reclaim those working from home. I think a lot of people feel that way, whether it's spending time with their kids or being able to engage in things other than work. Like that's so valuable to them. I also do think there's a contingent of people who will want to work in offices, and maybe that'll look a little bit different, right? Like maybe some traditionally office bound companies will be distributed and some people will be in the office and others won't. I've worked for companies that have paid for people to go to co-working spaces if that's where they feel like they're the most productive. So, another big takeaway from this, I think, is like, I think a lot of companies are more open to remote work than they used to be, but also that people are different and we need to offer them the flexibility to work in the way that allows them to do their best work.
Or as in marketing speak, people refer to it as the hybrid work environment, whatever shape that's going to take. But last question that I have for you is new engineering managers, somebody that is just becoming a manager, planning to become a manager, what's one mistake they should avoid going into that career track?
I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, and you have to let go of the idea of being the technical expert. Because if you are doing that, unless you work on a really, really small team, and maybe not even then, it means you're neglecting the other parts of your job. So acknowledging that the people are the first and most important part of being a manager, and that all of those other things are related to you being able to do your job well. That I think is the most important thing to me is knowing that like if you want to be a technical leader in the sense that like you're getting your all of your great ideas heard and you're writing a ton of code, I haven't seen that as being really compatible with also being like an effective people manager and also like building relationships with cross-functional partners and all those things. If you do all of that, you don't have time to be the technical expert in the room anymore.
Leverage the power of your team. This is great advice. Nicole, thank you so much for being here. For folks that want to learn more about the things that you're building, the things that you're working on, where should they go?
I do have a personal website, which is nicole-tibaldi.me. You can also follow me on Twitter at Nicole Tibaldi. I will warn you that you'll also find like dogs and baseball on there too, because I try to be just as much of a regular person as I am also, or I try to be at work. And if anybody is interested in talking more, I'm always happy to have people reach out to me on those different platforms and have a conversation.
Excellent. Nicole, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It was great to be here.